So my name's Chad. I'm a pastor here in Louisiana, and I'm trying to read the Bible in 30 days using a plan called the 30-Day Shred. And I'm doing this because I'm in a time of transition from full-time ministry to bivocational ministry, and we made the decision to move home. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is just to take that time and that space this month to recenter my heart and focus on some different ways. And today was a great day. I got up early. I went to a guy's small group with my brother-in-law. I went and saw my niece in a vacation Bible school opening worship ceremony. It was great. And then I came home, took care of some errands, that sort of thing. But it's been raining all afternoon, and it's been beautiful. I didn't work that much today, and I put some records on the record player. I sat back, I did some reading in the shred and some other stuff, and I took a long nap. I laid low. But today's video is about 1st and 2nd Samuel and the things that we see kicking up here. And it's actually kind of a favorite thread. A lot of times over the last couple of days, this has been about new discoveries and new things, but we see things in different lights when we're reading scripture this quick. And I came across this verse this morning, and I'm seeing the thread run in a bigger way than before, but I know about this thread. But that's what I want to talk about is this. And so let me read this to you. I'm not using my iPad. But this is what I read this morning. This is from 1 Kings 14. It's verse 24. And this is what it says. There were even male and female shrine prostitutes throughout the land, and the people imitated the detestable practices of the pagan nations that the Lord had driven from the land of the Israelites. Now, this sounds like a weird verse for me to read and to talk about, but I want to talk about idolatry and this pattern and practice of idolatry. And we see idolatry come into play very early on in Exodus in the 10 Commandments. When part of the 10 Commandments is God says, "Thou shalt have no other gods than me." We also see in Deuteronomy, in multiple times, he says to see the inhabitants of the land that I am giving you, do the exact opposite that they do in their worship practices, to not practice idolatry. And then what we see in this thread today is about the complete practice of idolatry by God's people. Now, a lot of times when we think about idols, we kick back and say, you know what, Chad? Don't have to worry about idols. I don't have any tiny little statues that I do like worship in front of. This is one of my Bigfoot statues. But it's not about the fact that we don't have these other little gods. And if we really dig into the idea of idolatry inside of the Old Testament, what we see is it's not people wholesale leaving God and abandoning Him completely. It's when they distort the picture of God and distort who God is. You know, so much of this, thou shalt not make no graven images. It goes back to Genesis chapter 1 when we see God and His triune self say, let us make man and woman in our image. So it's not so much about finding new gods, it's about how are we distorting our idea of God, and thereby in our distortions not showing a true picture of who He is. There's a fantastic book, and I found it in the shelves behind me. I've not organized the books yet. I just have all the books out. But it's by G.K. Beale. It's called We Become What We Worship. And it's a book about a biblical theology of idolatry. And it's fantastic. I read it in seminary, and then I reread it a few years ago. To be completely honest, I kind of want to reread it again. But what this asks us is, what is our heart doing with God? And is it true? I began thinking about this last night when I was reading these passages and things of it, and I wrote some notes down on Post-it notes because that's what I do when I think about something. And this is what I wrote down. The first one was this: idolatry reveals the inner desires and character of our heart. So what do we really want in life? not the pretty side of it, but what does our heart, what is our mind, where are we going, what do we really want? And what we'll see is idolatry will oftentimes expose that. And part of the broken, sinful nature is when our heart is out of control, when our desires are out of control, the ways that we will manipulate the story and identity of God to line up and match up with our own desires. And we have to ask ourselves the question, do we seek to live with the presence of God, or do we desire to simply exploit His power? You know, we live in a world now with multiple competing ideologies, and every one of those ideologies wants to name check Jesus as part of that. In fact, that's one of just the rips in the fabric of Western culture. But we can all be practicing idolatry, and we can all be practicing idolatry in our own unique way. And so much of this story, like I've talked about before, about the idea of metaphor, is it's not just us seeing this story like I read today and reading about these detestable practices and saying, well, I'm so glad I don't have one of those. Or it's not about us realizing that, being thankful we don't have a tiny little statue that we're actually worshiping. But it's instead us asking the question, how am I taking advantage or using the name of God to falsely bless the inner desires of my heart in a way that draws away from the truth of who He is? So that's what I'm thinking about today. We kick back up with more Kings, actually Chronicles, not Kings, but Kings inside of Chronicles. Probably more on Monday. It's also the weekend, remember? I don't make videos in the weekend, so we will see where we land on Monday. But share these. Thanks for coming and hanging out. I'm Chad, and thanks for coming to my TED Talk about idolatry.